In the winter of 1852, a cotton plantation along the Alabama River kept record that would make even the most hardened historian close the ledger and walk away. The owner's name was Marcus Holloway. He ran 1,400 acres. He owned 127 enslaved people, and in the back pages of his estate journal, buried between crop yields and equipment costs, he documents something historians have spent 170 years trying to pretend didn't exist. A breeding operation so systematic, so coldly efficient that it turned human beings into livestock and motherhood into a production quota. The entry that survives reads like inventory. Female, age 16, paired with male from Carver Plantation, projected yield 4 to 6 offspring, estimated value increased $1,200 over 10 years. That's not commerce? That's eugenics? And it happened on American soil, sanctioned by law, recorded in ink, buried so deep in our history that most people will never hear about it. This is the story they don't teach, the one that makes textbooks uncomfortable. The breeding farms of the antebellum South, where enslaved women became factories and children became profit margins. What you're about to hear comes from plantation ledgers, survivor testimonies collected decades after emancipation, and archive documents that sit in university basements, rarely opened, almost never discussed. This isn't speculation, it's documented horror. And it starts with a girl named Patience. Patience was born in 1836 on Holloway's plantation. Her mother picked cotton. Her father, she never knew him. He'd been sold before she could walk. By the time Patience turned 14, she wasn't sent to the fields. Holloway had other plans. The ledger lists her under a separate column, one he labeled stock increase. She wasn't assigned to harvest cotton. She was assigned to produce children who would. The practice had a name, though plantation owners rarely used it in public. They called it natural increase, a sanitized term for forced reproduction. After the transatlantic slave trade was banned in 1808, the domestic supply of enslaved labor became critical. Cotton was booming. Demand was exploding. But importation had stopped. So enslavers engineered a solution. They would breed their own workforce. Patience was 15 when she was moved into a cabin with a man named Samuel. He was 32. They'd never met. Didn't matter. Holloway's overseer, a man named Cleet Dawson, documented the pairing in his journal. He wrote, "Placed female with strong male from neighboring property. Arranged lease agreement, expect first birth within the year." That's a human being reduced to a breeding schedule. A teenage girl turned into a commodity, a man forced into a role that stripped him of every shred of autonomy. Samuel tried to refuse. The overseer's log notes he was whipped 40 times and denied food for 3 days. After that, there's no record of resistance, just compliance. Patience gave birth for the first time in 1852, a son. The ledger shows a notation, male healthy, value $450. No name, just a price. Within 2 weeks, the baby was taken to the main house to be nursed by another woman. Patience was rotated to a different cabin, paired with a different man. Holloway believed in diversification. He thought mixing bloodlines produced stronger workers. So he kept meticulous records, tracking lineage, noting physical traits, documenting which pairings produced the most valuable children. It was livestock management applied to people. One surviving lair from Holloway to a fellow planter in Georgia describes his system in detail. He writes, "I have found that females of childbearing age represent the greatest return on investment. A healthy woman purchased at $600 can yield $3,000 to $4,000 in increase over her lifetime. I rotate pairings every 18 months to maximize output and avoid sentiment which undermines productivity." He wasn't a monster in his own mind. He was a businessman. And that's what makes it so chilling. This wasn't rage or sadism. It was cold calculation. Human beings reduced to equations. By 1855, Patience had given birth 4 times, 4 children, none of whom she was allowed to raise. The plantation ledger tracks them like inventory. 2 boys sold to a planter in Mississippi. 1 girl kept on the property and assigned to field work at age 7. 1 infant who died within a month, cause unknown, listed as loss, no value recovered. Patience's testimony, recorded in 1937 when she was 101 years old as part of the Federal Writers Project, is one of the few survivor accounts that detail what this did to a person's mind. She said, "They took my babies before I even knew their faces. 5 times I carried a child, 5 times I birthed in blood and pain, and 5 times they pulled that baby from my arms before I could name it. I tried to die twice, drank lye water once, tried to drown myself in the river another time. They dragged me out, beat me for damaging property, said I was too valuable to waste." You want to know what that does to a woman? It don't just break your body. It breaks the part of you that knows how to love. After a while, I stopped feeling anything. When they took the 5th one, I didn't even cry. I just stood there empty. That's what they wanted. They didn't want mothers, they wanted breeders. The psychological destruction was intentional. Enslavers understood that attachment was dangerous. If a mother bonded with her child, she might resist when that child was sold. If a father felt protective, he might fight back. So they engineered separation. Babies were removed within days or weeks, mothers were rotated to new pairings, families were deliberately dismantled. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was strategy. Break the bonds, maximize the output, keep the system running. Now let's talk about the men, because they were victims too in ways that history often ignores. Samuel, the man paired with patience, left no written testimony. But other men did. In 1863, a formerly enslaved man named Josiah Henson published a narrative describing his experience. He wrote, "I was forced to live with women I did not choose, to father children I would never raise, to perform acts that made me feel less than human. And when I resisted, they told me I was being ungrateful, that I should be honored to increase the master's wealth. They made me complicit in my own dehumanization." That's the cruelty no one talks about. The men weren't just stripped of agency, they were forced to participate in a system that destroyed families, including their own. Some men were used repeatedly, moved from plantation to plantation like breeding stock. Overseers kept logs of which men produced the healthiest children. One South Carolina plantation ledger lists a man named Big Tom used in 7 document pairings over 4 years, noted for producing strong male offspring. That's not a person. That's a resource. And when Big Tom tried to run away in 1858, he was caught, castrated, and sold to a plantation in Louisiana where he couldn't reproduce anymore. His value, once listed at $1,200, dropped to $400. The message was clear: your body isn't yours. Your children aren't yours. Even your ability to create life belongs to someone else. By the 1850s, breeding operations were widespread. Historians estimate that between 1808 and 1865, the enslaved population in the United States grew from roughly 1 million to nearly 4 million. Natural increase, not importation, drove that growth. Some plantations specialized in it. In Virginia, a region known as the Black Belt became infamous for breeding farms, operations that produced enslaved people specifically for sale to the Deep South. Plantation owners advertised in newspapers. 1859, Eddie from a Richmond paper reads, "Prime breeding age female, proven fertility, available for purchase or lease, inquiries welcome." These weren't outliers. These were standard business practices. The economic incentive was staggering. A plantation owner could purchase a young woman for $600. If she produced 6 children over 15 years, those children could be sold for $3,000 to $4,000 total. That's a 500% return on investment. Better margins than cotton, tobacco, or sugar. Humanity didn't enter the equation. If you're still watching, you're confronting history most people will never see. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of the stories they buried. Hit that notification bell. Let's make sure these voices are finally heard. The children born into these systems faced their own horrors. Many were separated from their mothers before they could walk. They were raised in nurseries, large communal spaces where enslaved women, too old for field work, watched over dozens of children at once. There was no individual care, no maternal bonding, just survival. One testimony from a woman named Harriet Smith, recorded in 1863, describes what it was like. She said, "I was born on a Virginia plantation. I never knew my mama. They told me she was sold when I was a baby. I was raised with 30 other children in a shack behind the big house. We slept on the floor. We ate from a trough like animals. By the time I was 6, I was in the fields. By the time I was 12, the master started looking at me different. I knew what was coming. We all did. The girls who got chosen for breeding, we called them the unlucky ones, because at least in the fields, your body was your own at the end of the day. But if you were chosen, your body never belonged to you again." Harriet was 14 when she was paired with a man named Jacob. She gave birth to 3 children by the time she was 18. All 3 were sold before they turned 5. She never saw them again. Her testimony ends with a line that cuts deeper than any statistic. She said, "I don't even know if they're alive. I don't know their names. I don't know if they remember me." That's what slavery took, not just freedom, memory, identity, the ability to be a mother. Now let's examine this from the enslaver's perspective. Not to excuse it, but to understand how people justified the unjustifiable. Marcus Holloway's personal letters reveal a man who believed he was operating within the bounds of morality. In one letter to his brother in 1854, he writes, "The Negroes are a childlike race, incapable of managing their own affairs. We provide for them, shelter them, guide them. In return, they labor, and when they bear children, Those children are cared for as well. It is no different than breeding horses or cattle. It is the natural order. He genuinely believed that. So did thousands of others. They constructed an entire ideology to rationalize it. Pseudoscientific racism, biblical justifications, economic necessity. They told themselves enslaved people didn't feel pain the way white people did. That family bonds among black people weren't as strong. That separation was merciful because it prevented attachment. It was a lie, but it was a lie that sustained an empire. The overseers, the men who enforced these systems, left their own records. Clete Dawson, Holloway's overseer, kept a daily log. It's preserved in the Alabama State Archives. In it, he documents resistance. January 12, 1853. Female refuses pairing. Administered 15 lashes. Compliance achieved. March 8, 1853. Male attempts escape during rotation. Recaptured. Sold to Carver Plantation as example. April 3, 1853. Female birthed stillborn. No value. Reassigned to field work. These entries are clinical. No emotion. No recognition of suffering. Just bureaucracy. And that's what historian Stephanie Camp calls the banality of atrocity. The way evil becomes routine when it's systematized, when it's written into ledgers, and enforced by men who go home to their families at night and sleep soundly. The enslaved people resisted. Not always openly, because open resistance meant death, but in small, hidden ways. Some women used herbal abortifacients to prevent pregnancies, recipes passed down in secret, roots and herbs that could terminate a pregnancy or induce miscarriage. It was dangerous. If caught, the punishment was brutal. But some women chose that risk over bringing a child into bondage. Others practiced infanticide. It's a horrifying reality, but testimonies confirm it. One woman interviewed in 1866 said, "I smothered my baby the night she was born. I held her close and I stopped her breath. It was the only mercy I could give her. They called me a monster, but I knew what life she'd have. I knew they'd sell her. I knew she'd suffer like I suffered. So I made a choice, the only choice I had. That's not murder. That's resistance born from desperation. That's a mother trying to protect her child the only way the system allowed. Some men refused to participate. There are documented cases of enslaved men who chose punishment over compliance. One Louisiana plantation record from 1857 described a man named Elijah who was ordered to pair with a woman named Ruth. He refused. The overseer's log states male refuses breeding order. Administer 50 lashes over 2 days. Still refuses. Reassigned to chain gang. Elijah spent the rest of his life in irons, breaking rocks, because he wouldn't be complicit. That's courage. That's resistance. And history barely remembers his name. The women who survived these systems carried scars no one could see. In 1937, the Federal Writers Project interviewed over 2,300 formerly enslaved people. Many of them were in their 80s and 90s, the last generation with living memory of slavery. When asked about family, about children, many of them went quiet. One woman, her name recorded only as Aunt Cicely, said, "Don't ask me about my babies. I can't. I won't." Some things you don't speak on because speaking makes it real again. The interviewers noted that she wept for 20 minutes after that. Never spoke another word. The breeding programs didn't end with emancipation. The trauma passed down. Modern researchers studying epigenetics have found evidence that extreme stress and trauma can alter gene expression. The descendants of enslaved people, generations removed, show markers consistent with inherited trauma, depression, anxiety, hypervigilance. The psychological wounds of slavery aren't just historical. They're biological. They're still here. And we don't talk about it. After the Civil War, there was a concerted effort to sanitize slavery's history. The lost cause narrative painted enslavers as benevolent patriarchs and enslaved people as content. Breeding programs? Too disturbing. Too revealing. So they were erased from textbooks, omitted from public discourse, buried in archives. Marcus Holloway's plantation ledgers survived only because his great-grandson donated them to the University of Alabama in 1932. The university cataloged them but restricted access. They sat untouched for 60 years. When historian Deborah Gray White finally examined them in the 1990s, she described her reaction. She said, "I read those entries, and I felt sick. Not because I didn't know this happened, every historian knows, but seeing it documented so clinically, so matter-of-factly, made it undeniable. These weren't isolated incidents. This was policy. This was the economy. This was America." Patience lived to be 101. She died in 1937, just months after giving her testimony. The interviewer noted that she seemed relieved to have finally told her story. She'd carried it for 85 years in silence. At the end of the interview, she said something that was never included in the official record but appears in the interviewer's personal notes. She said, "People think slavery was about picking cotton. It wasn't. It was about breaking people so completely they forgot they were human. They took my body, they took my children, they took my name. I was called Patience because they said I was patient. But I wasn't patient, I was erased. And nobody noticed. Her children, the 5 she gave birth to, none of them are traceable, sold, scattered, lost. The genealogical record ends with her. The line Holloway tried to cultivate, the bloodline he tracked and bred and documented, it disappeared into history. No descendants, no legacy, just a name in a ledger and a testimony given 85 years too late. The plantation where Patience was enslaved is gone. The land was sold after the Civil War, subdivided, developed. There's a shopping center there now. A parking lot where the cannons used to stand. No historical marker, no plaque, nothing to indicate what happened on that soil. And maybe that's the final cruelty. The land itself forgot, but the documents remain. Holloway's ledgers are still archived at the University of Alabama. You can request to see them if you know they exist. Most people don't. Patience's testimony is part of the Library of Congress collection, buried in thousands of pages of oral histories that most Americans will never read. The story is there, it's documented, it's undeniable, it just isn't taught. So, why does this matter now, 170 years later? Because this is American history, not the comfortable version. Not the version that gets taught in 5th grade. The real version. The one that shows what happens when human beings are treated as property. When profit becomes more important than people. When a system is so efficient, so ingrained, that ordinary people participate in atrocity and sleep soundly. This isn't about guilt. It's about truth. It's about understanding that the wealth of this nation, the cotton that funded the Industrial Revolution, the economy that made America a superpower, it was built on the broken bodies of people like Patience. People who had names, who had dreams, who loved and suffered and resisted in ways we'll never fully know. If you've made it this far, you've heard something most people will never hear, something that was deliberately buried. Subscribe, share this video, leave a comment. Tell us what you think. Tell us if you believe this history should be taught. Because silence is how atrocity gets repeated. And the voices of people like Patience, they deserve to be heard. Even now, especially now. The stories they buried, the voices they silenced, we're bringing them back dead rich.